How can we turn disruption into opportunity and transformation? What tools, frameworks, and insights can help leaders navigate the constancy of uncertainty? And how can we unleash disruptive thinking, building roadmaps to imagine, invent, and prototype the future? I'll explore these questions and so much more with my very special guest, Roger Spitz, author of Disrupt with Impact, Achieve Business Success in an Unpredictable World. You touch on the concept of disruption in the book, and I'm wondering, could you share with us how you define disruption in today's rapidly evolving landscape? And more importantly, why do you view disruption as having, I think you call it a dual nature? And to what extent does this impact hinge on perspective, preparation, and the timing of response when you look at disruption this way?
Yeah, it's a tricky one because disruption is one of those words which is so overused and not to say abused, right? And we all have our perception of it. In the end, I think that for me, it's really paradoxically defined as a constant. So in other words, change is a constant. Therefore, you can debate whether it's disruptive or not because it's constantly just evolving. And the idea here is that the way you perceive the world, the assumptions, the worldviews you have, the way you look at the world, that window of perspective will affect the way you decide to prepare. And if you see the world as evolving, as less reliable in terms of the assumptions you can make about it, you'll think about a broader set of possibilities and prepare for those differently. And then when things happen that are maybe subsequent to disruptions that you don't expect, you can then have more agency around the nature and timing of your response and reduce the subset of emergencies. So you're kind of anticipating more, you're initiating and driving some of the changes yourself, and you're also reacting to a smaller subset of emergencies. So that for us is really the core of this kind of duality. And in our complex world, it's true that there is this duality of tensions and paradoxes where things aren't just clear cut as good or bad. So, change or disruption will affect a lot of people in different ways and will transfer trillions of value, both value creation and value destruction. So it's in that sense that there's some duality around its effect.
That's a great point. And your book does a wonderful job of introducing these concepts and explaining them with real-world examples. And I was particularly fond of the section where you talk about systemic change, and you have a moniker, it's like Disruption 3.0, but you juxtapose it with Clay Christensen's disruptive innovation. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about that and use that as a sort of a teeing off point for your concept Unvice. In the context of Disruption 3.0, what are some of the factors and impacts, and how does this help us understand Disruption 3.0?
Yeah. So listen, it's like many things. It's just, acronyms and play with words. But behind that, there's obviously the intention of honing in on something which we feel is important, right? So I think Disruption 1.0 for us is really Joseph Schumpeter. It's institutional. After the world wars in Europe, for instance, the economies reinvent themselves. There's some destruction, some creation, there's innovation, there's improvements in education, in healthcare, in many aspects. And so it's, again, coming back to that duality. Now, Clayton Christensen, an extraordinarily important and respected figure, and who am I to sort of say anything untoward around his views? And the idea is really, I have no view on disruptive innovation. I think it's a very sound and framework for a lot of the product development or market innovations, where an incumbent might, be disrupted by a more agile player targeting sort of a slightly different target audience initially. So I think Clayton Christensen and his teams wrote about, Uber not being disruptive innovation because fundamentally, Uber is targeting the same target market and audience as the normal taxis. But yes, there was an app. It was maybe a bit cheaper. But fundamentally, it's targeting the same people who just hailed a taxi. And Netflix, for Clayton Christensen, is disruptive innovation in the sense that Netflix was targeting, very tech-savvy, slightly kind of artsy, loyal, marginal customer base who loved the early adopters of Netflix in its previous models. And then as Netflix evolved and started competing with more mainstream incumbents, basically those loyal followers stayed very loyal and the audience broadened. And so that for me is disruption 2.0. And that still applies to many situations. We introduced disruption 3.0 in the sense that disruption is systemic, it's a constant. So unlike disruptive innovation, where you can define it, identify it, replicate it, consider that this applies or that doesn't apply, there are fewer rules in disruption 3.0. It's really, disruption is a constant, it's constantly evolving, it's dynamic, it's not so predictable or understandable, and so it's a different context. And the idea of UNVICE is a kind of acronym that we contrast to VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And UNVICE for us is simply unknown. So unknown is, the uncertainty and ambiguity of VUCA, the lack of knowledge. Volatile, which we keep from VUCA, which we think, we need to understand the speed of shifts, the texture and magnitude of change. Intersecting is something we add to VUCA with UNVICE. It's the I for intersecting, because as boundaries disappear, you have separate areas that connect. And effectively, intersections, they create new combinations as new elements converge or intersect and overlap. So you start respecting that everything connects to everything else. Complex is, the same as in VUCA. It limits our understanding. It's in constant flux. It's unpredictable. It's non-linear, so it's disproportionate impacts. And the idea of exponential, which is the final E in UNVICE, so unknown, volatile, intersecting, complex, and exponential for UNVICE, the E of exponential is really just to give a sense of the velocity, the speed, the sudden possible changes of our environment. So UNVICE is really a term that seeks to describe our context, the environments we operate in. VUCA was coined 50 years ago with the US military that considered its environment to be, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And we're adding this element of intersection, which creates change and velocity through exponentiality. And the final thing we play with UNVICE is that it's the opposite of advice. So unlike more reliable environments where you can sort of follow a playbook or just experience or whatever consultant tells you, UNVICE, you need to be slightly more self-reliant of this constant flux and pay attention to change, to adapting, to sense-making of this particular environment.
Roger, I'd like to jump ahead a little bit and talk about how you discuss in the book technology and how we can benefit from its effects while anticipating its unintended outcomes that may arise. And where I'm going, I was hoping you could tackle two at a time. And I'm talking about AI and its impact on decision making. And then what do you see with regard to quantum computing in this regard as well?
Yeah, so the way I try to look at it is with humility. So instead of, which is hard for anyone, let alone myself. So I probably failed, but I try. And what I mean by that is to appreciate the degree of knowability of certain things. So certain features of AI are known today, but not all. Will there be AGI, artificial general intelligence, or artificial super intelligence, where machines, reach decision outcomes and capabilities which, might be similar or beyond what humans can do. And, when you look at the magic and dangers, I guess, of quantum, you can speculate a lot about what it looks like and the feasibility, and there's enough, clever people spending a lot of time analyzing how close we are, whether it's possible, what it will look like. I'm not one of those, but what I do consider is that while you can't be certain that you'll reach quantum computing era, you probably don't want to dismiss its possibility either. And that if you were to reach a quantum era where it's scalable at economically and technologically, probably it would be life-changing in terms of, being able to run, Schrödinger's cat and run multiple, like futurists, we think about multiple possible futures. I guess in quantum, you'd be thinking about multiple present realities and simulating those in infinite way with applications, from all the things you know and your audience, would read about, medical cures and or a million other things, and not to mention cybersecurity. And we're already in a it's a sort of cyber insecure and challenged world. Quantum, I can't even imagine if you can break through everything. So it has ramifications. And then the way I try and think about it is there's a lot of very interesting frames which people have, which we call the complex five, which is, if you take Michelle Walker, who phenomenally important book on the gray rhino, those are known knowns. You might have a gray rhino that could be charging at you. The probability is extremely high. It's a high impact. It's swift. You have strong evidence of that. And some things are known knowns. And so, disinformation or the need to skill, to rethink skills and reskilling. So you want to avoid being trampled and anticipate the impacts of technology in terms of known knowns, such as AI. And then at the other extreme, you have unknown unknowns. And here it's, a good word for it is Nassim Taleb's black swan. And, we talked about artificial general intelligence or super intelligence. And here, by definition, it's unknown unknowns. So the probability is low, but the impact is enormous. There's low evidence. So unlike the gray rhino, there's no evidence. You cannot predict that. So here you're thinking about building resilient foundations and paying attention to rare events, which are becoming more frequent and which have very profound impacts. And so that's a different kind of approach to technology. What if there were extreme catastrophic failures in terms of internet? So that's the extreme. And then between the kind of known knowns and unknown unknowns, there's kind of what we call the black jellyfish, which are unknown knowns, which are very important, which are emergent. So here you have a low to a medium probability, again, a very high impact. But the difference is that you might have a long tail because the change might be gradual and you currently have low evidence. So effectively, to be very concrete, the term black jellyfish was labeled by PostNormal, is I think the name they go by, an extraordinarily important work. They've expanded on a lot, and the individuals, they are both collectively and individually doing very important foresight work. And the idea is that they took the scientific result of global warming and sea temperatures rising, and they noticed that the jellyfish were increasing in quantity. And I mean, not they noticed, but that's kind of well known by people who follow, climate and that. And once you had more jellyfish in the sea from the seawater temperature rising, you had a lot of clogged, suddenly, nuclear ships and nuclear plants and all kinds of things. And so what our post-normal times colleagues did is consider, well, okay, basically, you understand what's happening in the black jellyfish. It's an unknown known. You understand the first degree of change, more jellyfish. But what you don't necessarily have a handle on, and this is the tricky thing, is the second or third order implications that you might have nuclear plants or all kinds of other changes that affect you. And so here, it's that gradual second, third, fourth order implications. That might be, for instance, disinformation or fusing AI with biotech or all kind of things where you might have some handle on the initial change, but not the next more gradual ones. So this is another degree of kind of uncertainty. And then the kind of fourth one is known unknowns. It's the black elephant, right? It's the elephant in the room. It's standing there, but you choose to ignore it. It can have a high impact, but you choose to ignore it because you don't believe in it, because you can't get an agreement, because you don't want to deal with it. It's COVID or pandemic in the early days or before it becomes a gray rhino. And so here, for technology, it's the kind of things that, the elephants in the room, effectively. And I think to kind of wrap a slightly long answer, I think the way as a futurist, I try to think about technology is to appreciate the different degrees of knowability and understanding of different technologies at their current stages, and to make sure that you constantly, from building resiliency to asking about how the initial reverberations can cascade further, to avoid, to try and anticipate the impacts, to mobilize action and align stakeholders once you start realizing that something is reaching a critical point. acknowledging the reversibility of some of these key technologies. And so you really do need to have mitigants and anticipatory and feedback loops, because you might reach certain milestones that are difficult or impossible to reverse.
Roger, I want to talk about frameworks, and particularly, if I could, I'd like to talk about the AAA framework that you have in your book. And I think it's important because there are qualities and characteristics you point out that we need to develop in order to improve our abilities, as the world becomes more complex and unpredictable. I was wondering, what can you tell us about this framework? I think the certain qualities are anti-fragile, anticipatory, and agile. And will you help us? How do we apply these things?
Yeah, so it's one of the many AAA kind of acronyms that the world uses for all kinds of things. It wasn't intentional, but as I kind of delved into a lot of the wonderful work that's out there on people thinking about these asymmetries and complexities and unpredictabilities, I kind of felt that there were three ingredients to help us as humans build capacity to become more effective with complexity and unpredictability, and not only effective, but also to realize that maybe it's not necessarily a bad thing per se. Change, it's in Zen philosophy or Eastern philosophy, it's not necessarily something that is positive or negative. It's just a constant. The anti-fragile, I was spending some time reading the extraordinarily important 5-volume collection of Nicholas Nassim Taleb, Incerto, and one of which is anti-fragile, which is a term he coined to contrast to fragile. And his observation was that resiliency was important, and in fact resiliency is a prerequisite for anti-fragility. But fundamentally, something that's resilient or robust, it's like an elastic, right? You can kind of hit it, it takes shocks, but while it doesn't break, it doesn't necessarily improve. And the idea of anti-fragility is that it strengthens even with shocks. So examples of this, for instance, are, take the satellite Starlink versus Viasat, the more kind of, traditional, hierarchical, big R&D satellites that a lot of the military use, which are Viasat. When Russia invaded Ukraine, it took them no time to deactivate the Viasat satellites. And fortunately, for sort of a slightly less efficient, more decentralized, low Earth orbit kind of Starlink configuration, that is basically 2 years in the running. And to date, Russia has not been able to deactivate that. And not only that, but the more kind of Starlink gets hit and tweaked and stuff, the kind of more resilient it becomes. So the idea of anti-fragile, which is the first A of the AAA framework, is kind of try and have foundations that are resilient and maybe even reinforce when shocks happen. So they like errors, they embrace risk, etc. Anticipatory is what we've been touching upon on some of our topics. It's really, thinking longer time horizons, your capacity to prepare for future change. So really anticipatory is you're preparing for the future. You're thinking about the weak signals we talked about. You're trying to detect also the opportunities and just thinking about the next order implications, the black jellyfish idea that you need to look at changes as they might evolve and cascade and that. And the third A after anti-fragile foundations and preparing for the future in an anticipatory way is to kind of acknowledge that actually only the present exists. And so we put the third A as agility, which is the agility to reconcile the longer time horizons from your visioning and your anticipatory work, but to inform decision-making today, because somehow you're emerging in the present, you need to make sense and make decisions today and bridge that longer-term thinking with the short-term. And that's emergent, it's a discovery process, it's trial and error, and you need that kind of emergent cognitive and strategic agility to do that. And so the AAA is really having those anti-fragile foundations, an anticipatory longer-term thinking, and the agility to inform decision-making today.
This has been a special edition of the Business of Government Hour, a conversation with authors, with Roger Spitz, author of Disrupt with Impact. achieve business success in an unpredictable world. And be sure to join us next time for another informative, insightful, and in-depth conversation on improving government leadership and its effectiveness. Until then, subscribe, download, and listen to the entire interview at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Audible, or on your favorite podcast app, and as always at businessofgovernment.org.